I interviewed the world's leanest person. He was at 3.5% body fat. I interviewed him when he's more closer to 20% body fat, and it wasn't through just binging. I know that makes no sense, but this interview will share more. If you've tried all the different diets, or even changed your macros, or have tried fasting, or you've tried all the different exercise regimens, and nothing is really moving the needle enough for you to be at the weight that you want to be, or lose the extra few pounds that you are trying to, or the excess lot of pounds that you're trying to lose, or that you are trying to build muscle mass and it's not really moving the way that you want to, I highly recommend watching this interview. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing. And that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Robert Sikes and we talk about all the nuances in bodybuilding and how they use diet and exercise as tools to refine their body. We talk about how a lot of that, even in the mental wellness space, really can be reflected on to the average person that is just trying to be healthy, lift a little bit, and just get a better body composition. If you listen to our interview, we talk about different macros and meal timings and how much meat or protein to eat in a meal and how much exercise is needed or what type of exercise and what to do if you're plateaued with weight, but you want to lose a little bit more weight. We also talk about if carbohydrates are needed to lift heavier or perform better at the gym and what minimum protein thresholds that we should be consuming daily to make sure that we're maintaining muscle mass. And if it's the protein that's most important, or if it's lifting that's more important. And if you're interested in all of this information, he has a new program out called the Savage System, where he walks through so much of this and a lot more in his new program, which also has a group function feature in it. I have personally seen many group programs and how they're structured and their layout. And I really like Robert's because it's very simplified, it's clean, and it gets to the point. And I wanted to show you even a little bit under the hood. I asked Robert for his permission and he said, it's okay. I am getting zero commission for this. And I truly like to share people's programs and things that will move the needle to healing and wellness when I truly believe in it. So if you go to ketobodybuilding.com, you could see his new program, the Savage System. He has a membership community, coaching, and then he has his courses. And I am logged in right now, but if you look at the Savage System, and then the tribe is where his community is. In the Savage System, you could see his comprehensive course. So he has all of these modules. So if you go through each module, you'll see the different videos and informations per topic. So for preliminary groundwork, you can see that he has a psychological prep for prep, and then all of the different information. And you can see that even if you are not competing, that there's so much information that you can benefit from, including, for example, let's say you talk about hormones, and then there's a little clip on hormones. The Savage System has over 209 lessons. And then the beauty of this program is that they have a membership community. Again, I'm not getting paid. I'm not affiliated. I'm not sharing this for any reason other than I believe in Robert's mission and I believe in the product and services he sells. And a lot of the material in this program can help you refine your body composition, build the muscle mass that you want to, or lose the weight that you want in a way that's healthy, that thinks about disordered eating, that thinks about eating disorders, that is hyper aware of a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet. And all of that is encompassed in a community of like-minded people that you can join as a community too. And you'll see in this conversation where we talk about some of the nuances that are in his program, but also the way that he believes to refine the body. And I think it's very helpful. He's probably the first person that I believe that maybe I can get a six pack if I truly wanted to. And I've never believed that. And I know there's no context in that, but in this conversation, you'll understand why. Hey, Robert, it's so good to have you back on. I think this is the third or fourth time you've been on. But I'm super excited to have you on. There's lots of new things going on for you. But if you can introduce yourself for the people that have may not watched any of our past interviews.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So I am Robert Sikes, Keto Savage. I'm a lifetime natural competitive bodybuilder, and I've been doing a ketogenic diet now for the past 8 or 9 years now. I went pro in 2017 and then again in 2023, all with a ketogenic approach. And I'm the formulator of the Keto Brick, Live Savage Apparel, Keto Savage, all these things wrapped up into one. and talking about bodybuilding performance, health, nutrition, fitness, improving disordered eating tendencies, all that stuff bundled up into one big package. That's pretty much me in a nutshell. And I'm just super passionate about this lifestyle and super passionate about talking about it with you, Judy.
I think it's so helpful to see the bodybuilding world. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, that doesn't relate to me. But recently, you and I were on a food addiction panel at Hack Your Health. And then I think about a lot of this disordered eating that happens in the bodybuilding world, how even people that are super mentally healthy, that once they start to cut or they start refeeding or they start to do certain things with their diet, maybe they're under eating, maybe they're eating super lean proteins, but a lot of people will then fall into this disordered eating. Maybe if you could share some stories about why it's so important maybe not to eat too low of fat or cut calories too much, even just for the average person, because in the bodybuilding world, you see how it can then lead to disordered eating.
Yeah, so it's funny because I always encourage people to think of themselves as bodybuilders, whether they're planning on stepping on stage or not, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all the same species. So what principles and protocols bodybuilders apply to build muscle, lose body fat, like those same principles would apply to everybody. So that should be pretty unanimous. As far as the disordered eating tendencies are concerned, bodybuilders often struggle with that because they go through periods of extreme tracking macronutrients, extreme fat loss phases, and when they get that lean, their leptin and ghrelin hormones start to be, affected. Their relationship with food is impacted quite a bit. And then when the show is over, they oftentimes just let the reins fall off and eat everything in sight. And they can't really regulate that through intuitive eating because those hormones are so out of whack. So it's pretty common for people in the bodybuilding space to start binging and then purging, and that's where that relationship with food kind of goes downhill. That's what happened to me. That's happened. I mean, that's honestly the common story amongst bodybuilders. But the same thing often happens with people that are not bodybuilders because they'll go through periods of restricting, chronically under eating, not eating ample dietary fat, having those hormones out of whack. And then when they go that long without ample nutrition, they'll start to binge and purge themselves. So there's a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels between the bodybuilding space and the general public. So I think there's a lot of overlap there that we can learn from each other. And I think at the end of the day, having a structured building phase and a structured cutting phase, which is pretty typical amongst the bodybuilding community, would be beneficial for the general public, whether they again plan on competing or not.
There was a study a long time ago called the Minnesota Starvation Study, and they grabbed super healthy men to see how under eating or starvation would affect them. And then all of the, and none of them had eating disorder, none of them had any mental imbalances. And after a period of time where they were all sort of locked in this one facility and they were not able to be fed, and they had very low calories. I think they could drink coffee and sticks of gum, and that was the only thing they could have between meals. And all the meals were very, very low in calories. And over time, all of them started having disordered eating and disordered eating tendencies. I think even after the study, some of them carried on with that. And then they had PTSD from all of it and they would hoard food and stuff. So I think everyone is susceptible to some type of disordered eating if you're not eating the right way. And it sounds like you're saying that there's these certain phases that would benefit just the general population. So maybe if you're trying to lose weight, maybe there's a smarter way to do it. It sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, I think, I get it. Like, I work with people that compete and people that are just general population that are trying to lose weight. And one of the common demographics I get that work with me are, females that have been on some form of diet for years, 20, 30, 40 years. And they've just chronically restricted their intake. They've got a negative relationship with food as a result. They feel like they're just constantly frustrated because they're not making progress. And they've just not eaten ample nutrition. Like, there's benefit to having periods of time where you're intentionally eating at a surplus. That improves your overall metabolic function, and it allows you to put on a healthy amount of body fat so that when you do transition into a deficit, a fat loss phase, your body becomes much more responsive to that because you have that higher, metabolic rate at onset, at baseline. So that would be super important there. As far as like the relationship with food goes, I feel like a lot of people have a relationship with food that's negative because there's this sense of guilt associated with it. And for me, my transition to the ketogenic diet came as primarily a way to improve that relationship with food because there was not a guilt associated with the types of foods I was eating because it was all just quality, real foods. And I feel like when people are, trying to go through a fat loss phase, they're sacrificing treats and things that they enjoy eating that are sweet, and then they give up. They feel like they can't reach that goal. and they binge on those hyper palatable processed foods that then, they feel guilty for eating because they know innately that it's not quality food. That just kind of makes that negative feedback loop all the more prominent.
So we see a lot of clients similar to what you're saying, especially we'll get women that maybe they're eating 1,200 calories consistently or a certain amount of calories, and they know exactly what they can eat every single day that will hit those calories. And then anything beyond that, maybe adding a couple tablespoons of fat or eating a different type of fatty cuts of meat, they're scared to do it because their gut reaction is this is going to make me gain weight. But the weight that they're at currently is not giving them health. So maybe their thyroid's imbalanced, maybe they have thinning skin, losing hair, loss of period, hormonal effects. And so obviously the way they're eating is not beneficial for their symptoms. Is there a certain amount of time that maybe people need to refeed or eat even in excess of the calories that maybe they need to finally find in balance? That's like the big question that people get is, how long do I have to eat this way? Do I expect to gain a ton of weight? Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
It's tough. I mean, when I've got people that come to me that fit that demographic criterion and they're 30, 40-year-old women that want to lose weight, and they come to me and they've been chronically undereating the majority of their life, and then I tell them, hey, look, we're going to increase your calories, you're going to gain some weight, and you're going to have to be okay with it. That's a hard sell for me as a coach. Like, nobody nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to pay me to have them gain more weight. But the reality is, if what they've done for the past 20, 30 years isn't working for them, they don't really have anything to lose except to try this somewhat seemingly barbaric approach. But there's not really a reason not to, because when you look at it from a metabolic standpoint, it makes so much more sense. Because what happens is, when you, like, our metabolisms are very adaptable. And when you've been chronically under eating, your metabolism down regulates and depresses as a survival mechanism to cope with that lower intake. The same is true in reverse, though. When you start overfeeding or reverse dieting or eating at a surplus or above a maintenance, that exact opposite thing happens. So your body upregulates its metabolic rate and function. You have more NEAT activity. You have, more energy. Everything starts to improve. Your sleep quality improves. Like, everything starts to improve. Your training, your performance, your recovery, all that stuff. And when you allow that to happen for an ample period of time for your body to reset things, it's going to make transitioning into a fat loss phase all the more effective. And if someone's been under eating for far too long, I recommend no less than 6 months. But depending on the individual, it may take even longer than that. From a competitor standpoint, there's typically, phases that people are going through, whether it's a fat loss phase, a building phase, or like a reverse diet phase. And a good rule of thumb for people that are structuring their phases like that is to spend at least 3 times as much time in a building phase than is spent in a deficit phase. So, like, for me, I competed throughout 2023. I was in a diet for 33 weeks, and then I spent the next 20 weeks reverse dieting out of that deficit. So pretty much a full year. So I don't plan on competing again for another 3 years at least before I go through another fat loss phase. But most people aren't bodybuilders, so that wouldn't necessarily be applicable. But again, for the general public, no less than 6 months. But oftentimes the benefits are going to be had after, 2 years at legitimate intake before they try and transition into a fat loss phase.
Hey guys, I just wanted to stop this interview for a quick second and share that we are doing a live free webinar on the mind body program and the importance of why the mind body even matters in true healing. Make sure to check out the free webinar. It is valued at $1,200. There will be several practitioners on the call, including myself. And you can see all the details at nutritionwithjudy.com/MB webinar. That's MB webinar. And you could see all the information in the show notes. Make sure to sign up because there's limited seating in these free webinars. Bring all your questions and I will see you guys all there. Bye, guys. I know for me personally, I didn't track a lot just because of my own disordered eating background. But when I went on a ketogenic diet, still plant-based, I think I lost a little bit of weight. And then when I went carnivore, I gained a little bit of weight. And you could probably even see it in some of my earlier on videos. But I just trusted the process because I was so desperate in healing. I just trusted I'm just going to eat, even though maybe I'm gaining, and I didn't gain a ton, but just a little bit. But over just the years of eating this way, my appetite for the super high fat has dropped a little. So now maybe I just need the ribeye without adding like 2 tablespoons of butter. Maybe I just need one, or maybe I don't need any and I just eat the ribeye. And my appetite has balanced and without symptoms. So I think what you're saying with your metabolism can go up and down, I totally see it. If I eat too lean of protein, my body craves fat. And so then I'll eat it. But eventually my weight has balanced. I'm sure maybe I could lose a little bit more weight. I don't know, but it's not a motivating enough desire anymore. But I wanted to ask with that, do you think our body, because my body weight always tends to kind of go back to this weight, whether I lose a little or gain a little, is there a set point that you think people's bodies want to be at? So if I wanted to personally get a six pack, I would have to undereat fast, cut out my fat, like really, really try hard. And maybe you disagree with me, but at least that's what I think that would require me to not just have a flat stomach, but have a six pack. Is there a set point? And the reason we're asking this is we get clients that are like, I'm at a 15% body weight and now I want to get to six, or, there's this like really drop in weight that they want to get to, or body fat percentage. And is there a place where your body wants to be and that otherwise we're sacrificing to get to that point?
There is definitely a homeostatic set point, but there's a
Okay.
range associated with that. So, for instance, using myself as an example, when I'm in a prep, like this past year, I competed at like 3.9% body fat, which
Wow.
is as lean as I got, which is far from sustainable or healthy or optimal for anybody. I don't recommend that for any length of time. But like right now, I've reverse dieted from that. That was at a weight of 155. Right now, I'm like 195. So I've gained quite a bit from that. I'm at the higher end of my homeostatic set point now because I'm at about 18% body fat now. So my body naturally gravitates to operating between about 12 and 18% body fat in a building phase, at an intake and a composition that is pretty effortless for me to maintain. But for me, at 18% body fat, I still have visible abs and, definition because I've got ample muscle as like a base. For someone that is untrained, them at 18% body fat is going to look different than me at 18% body fat.
Okay.
But you can kind of change your homeostatic set point in a sense. Like if someone is, you know, 300 pounds and 35, 40% body fat, like that is not like that's not a death sentence. That's not where they have to live indefinitely. They can certainly lose body fat, improve muscle composition, and stabilize at a leaner composition. It just is going to take some work to get there initially. And the thing is, the more times you cycle through these building and cutting phases, your homeostatic set point changes, like where your body feels comfortable and naturally gravitates to changes. You just have to cycle through these phases with enough time and enough intention for your body to kind of stabilize at what point it feels most comfortable.
What I'm hearing from you and my scenario would be if I wanted to get to a six pack in a healthy way, I would probably have to build more muscle in my ab area and then be able to be okay through those phases you're mentioning so that even at a higher body weight that maybe my body wants to be at, then my abs would show a little bit more.
We'll peel the curtain back even further. What is your current, if you don't mind saying, what is your current weight and body fat estimate? Any idea?
I know my body weight, but I don't know my body fat. I've never actually tested it, but my weight. So I'm a little shy of being 5'8", and then I weigh between 130 and 135, which I've never shared publicly. So, ta-da.
So if you're 130, 135 now, let's just say you're 20% body fat for
Okay.
simplicity. If it took you to get down to 16% body fat to have visible abs, let's say that puts you at, I don't know, 125. So 10 pounds shy of what you are currently.
Okay.
Your body is going to naturally want to get back to 130, 135. That's where you
Mhm.
spend the majority of your time. But if you
Right.
got down to 125 and 16% body fat, stayed there for a little bit of time, and then maybe reverse dieted up to, say, 128, 130, you would be at a lower body fat than you are now, but it would
Okay.
feel about the same as you feel now from like an ease of maintenance standpoint. And then each time you were to go into a fat loss phase, you basically would want to get beyond what you feel comfortable, like get leaner than you would be able to maintain indefinitely. But then when you reverse diet up from that point, you stabilize at a better composition than what you started at. So you kind of like improve your starting and stopping position each time, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But when I'm leaning out, how do I make sure that I don't start feeling that hunger, like the Minnesota starvation study? And because we feel hungry if like I will feel hungry if I'm not eating enough fat, and then I see myself wanting to go to the kitchen and maybe snack. So when I'm leaning out, if I'm reducing my calories or eating less fat, how do I not fall into the disordered eating territory, especially because I have a history of it?
Some of that, it's a tricky one because like when I'm in a prep, like I'm definitely hungry. Like I'm not gonna say that it's not like when I'm 9% body fat, I'm starving. I'm very hungry. And that is an extreme version of that. But when you go into a deficit, like your body doesn't intuitively gravitate to that. Like your
Okay.
body is smart in that it wants to survive. And if you are dipping into a deficit, your body is sending you signals that, hey, I'm hungry, go eat more food because it wants to maintain that comfortable homeostatic set point. But to push beyond that, you have to push beyond what you're intuitively, leaning towards doing. So there may be a period of time in which you are embracing a little bit of hunger, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
So you have to have the right mentality going into it, but at the same time, like you do want to make it sustainable. So like you, Judy, would probably never need to get as lean as I would competing, so you wouldn't have to embrace that degree of hunger. But it's all relative. So if you've never been that hungry before, it may seem like the hungriest you've ever been or ever will be, but you gain that perspective each time you go through it. But then as you get leaner and then as you build more muscle, your body's composition changes all the while. So you now at 135, carrying the amount of muscle you have, you may, build more muscle and be 140 at some point, but have more muscle than you do now. So your composition would still be improved. And if you've got more muscle, you've got a higher metabolic rate to begin with anyway. So you could consume more food and it not lead to more fat gain.
No, that totally makes sense. And I think that if I'm going in knowing that I'm going to be hungry and it's not a because I'm trying to get skinny or I'm trying to compensate for the last meal I had, I think there's differences in what you're saying into going into it and being a lot more methodical and even having a coach. These things would be helpful to understand this is what I'm going to expect, trying to build more muscle and maybe lean out a little bit instead of it being completely disordered like I had. I binged last night, so today I'm going to undereat on purpose or fast or not eat any fat so that I can quickly lose the calories that I gained from yesterday. So I think that all makes sense. Do you have a minimum threshold of protein consumption per day for anyone?
Anybody, it kind of depends on. So this is interesting. This is kind of how a little bit of how my protocol varies from traditionally what's done in bodybuilding circles. So oftentimes people will say, okay, what is your lean mass? And you're going to consume, 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass is a pretty common recommendation. And that's certainly fine. But from my standpoint, when I'm in a fat loss phase, my goal is no longer to build more lean tissue. It is simply to preserve the amount of lean tissue that I currently have
Okay.
because you cannot really optimally build muscle and lose fat simultaneously. Like you kind of have to have one goal. So when I'm in a fat loss phase, my goal is to burn as much fat as I can while preserving as much lean tissue as I can. And in that context, I need to make sure that I am using the muscle that I do have. I have to keep it in high demand so my body's not willing to become catabolic. And while having enough protein consumption at that point is very important, making sure that I'm demanding my muscles be worked is also equally important. Like preserving lean tissue is most optimally done by keeping that tissue in demand. And for me, being ketogenic, fat adapted, I'm getting my energy from dietary fat. So carbohydrates are always pretty much at a minimum. And when I'm training, if I notice that my training is starting to be suffered because I'm not consuming ample energy, ample dietary fat, I'll sometimes down regulate my protein consumption so that I can consume more dietary fat, given a certain caloric allotment for the day. And that allows me to train harder so that my muscles are still in demand so I can preserve that lean tissue. And ketones are obviously very anti-catabolic as well. So I can actually preserve more lean tissue by keeping my dietary fat high. And if I've only got so many calories to work with, I'll sometimes titrate my protein down.
Do you think that's why maybe you still have energy or a sufficient energy to, bulk up? Because one of the big things we always hear in our practice is whether it's a nocebo effect or not, meaning that just because you believe it's becoming true, but we hear so many people. I know you guys say you don't need carbs, but when I eat carbs or I carb load right before I work out or the night before, I can lift so much heavier. Do you think it's because they're not in a ketogenic state and maybe they're just eating sufficient protein, but not enough fat or carbohydrates?
Yeah, what I found is that people that are having energy issues, it can come from a variety of things. One, they may just not be consuming ample nutrition to begin with. So they may be in a deficit. Like if they're in a deficit, then they may not be consuming ample energy. They may not have enough calories coming in. If they do have ample calories coming in, as you and I both know, protein is not a great substrate for energy. You can create energy via gluconeogenesis, but that's not optimal. So you're pretty much getting your energy from either carbs or fats. And if you are trying to do it with a ketogenic or carnivore approach, and you're not consuming carbohydrates and you're not consuming ample dietary fat, then your energy is going to be hindered for sure. Because if you're only consuming protein, I mean that's again not a great substrate for energy, but it oftentimes leads to more joint pain and inflammation, and it's just not optimal. So everyone's going to have a unique protein threshold. Like for me, for instance, I'll notice that when my protein exceeds my dietary fat to a certain degree, my energy really starts to be hindered. So I'll need to upregulate my fat intake at that point. So figuring out where those thresholds lie for each individual is key. But yeah, if someone's suffering from lack of energy while training, then but they notice an improvement when they eat carbohydrates, it's likely because they're not deeply fat adapted and truly using fat as the primary fuel source.
So would you recommend for someone that's just sort of new to ketogenic diets to then, instead of eating carbs right before a strenuous workout, to actually eat a little bit of fat, or even, the exogenous ketones supports?
They could totally do fat, especially like an MCT, so a medium chain triglyceride that's going to be absorbed and assimilated much faster than a traditional fat source. That would make sense. But for them, honestly, just staying in a fat adapted state, staying in a ketogenic state, staying in a carnivore state, not consuming carbohydrates for ample period of time is key. And people are going to start to experience the benefits of, blood sugar regulation and more mental acuity relatively quickly post eliminating carbs from their diets. But from a performance standpoint, that takes quite a bit of time. So I always encourage people to give it at least a strict 6 months before trying to bring in additional carb sources or just, keep them out entirely. Because from a performance standpoint, it takes a lot more time to build up those metabolic pathways. So I'm always a fan of letting your body truly become deeply fat adapted before, measuring your performance against what you were doing with carbohydrates.
Let me take a step back into the minimum threshold of protein. So I know you were saying when you have a certain amount of calories to handle or
Mhm.
to use, you can dial up the fat and support the ketogenic state of the body. But what is your minimum? So would it be that, in the carnivore space, for example, we sort of say 0.8 grams per ideal body weight, per pound of ideal body weight, to about 1 gram of protein per 1 pound of ideal body weight? Do you have a threshold that you sort of look at?
So I'm an extremist. Like I've pushed the limits quite a few times. On my first ketogenic prep in 2017, I've got about 150 pounds of lean tissue. I took my protein down as low as 69 grams for a very finite period of time
Okay.
to see how low I could take it without losing any lean tissue. And I didn't really experience any loss of lean tissue for that finite period of time with the protein being that low. I'm not suggesting that people go that low. I don't think it's necessary. I just wanted to see what was possible. What I have noticed is that in prior years, when I would follow a more traditional bodybuilding approach with very, very high protein and relatively low dietary fat, I would lose significantly more lean tissue and my performance would suffer much more than in times since where I would actually drop the protein a bit and keep my dietary fat higher. So everyone's going to have a unique threshold. A good rule of thumb at a building or maintenance phase is to try and target at least 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass. You can go a bit beneath that without risking a loss of skeletal muscle tissue as long as you are demanding that tissue be used.
What's so interesting is in the carnivore space, especially for women or older women, if I recommend the 0.8 grams, so I'm not even saying the 1 gram per 1 pound of ideal or your lean body mass, but for a lot of women, they say that's too much meat for them, which I find so fascinating because 0.8 grams for somebody like my weight that now we've shared, I could probably, that would equate to maybe 20 ounces of a ribeye. And obviously that's a fattier cut. So your calories will be on the higher end, but that should be sufficient. But for the average woman that we work with, that's too much meat. At least that's what they share.
What's interesting is that a lot of people have a hard time getting proteins and fats in because they are satiating in nature, but a lot of that's simply because they haven't had a period of time where they're truly eating at a surplus, which is again going to upregulate their metabolic rate. I've had so many people that have a hard time getting food in because they've chronically undereaten.
Right.
Encourage them to eat more, they'll spend a week or two almost force feeding. It seems as such. But then as soon as they do that for a week or two, they notice that their appetite increases drastically. And they have no problem at all getting that food in because their metabolic rate is upregulated as a result of that, you know, additional feeding. So I think a lot of it is just simply giving their body ample time at a surplus or just simply an increase so that their metabolic pathways can upregulate to the point where they would see an increase in hunger. Like I've got one female client now that is consistently eating 3,000 calories a day
Wow.
and not putting on body fat, where she came from a period of time where she was consuming, sub 1,000 calories a day because her metabolic rate was so depressed, now she has no problem getting that amount of protein and that amount of fat in because her appetite's increased, her performance has improved, her sleep's improved, her hormones have stabilized because she's actually giving her body the nutrition it needs.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes so much sense in terms of just maybe a little bit of eating a little bit more so that then you can tolerate eating. And I don't want people also, because there's a little bit of a trend, and I don't even know if it's a trend or if it's a protocol where people will then eat a lot and then starve for many days. And I don't think that's what we're recommending.
I've heard of that. And yeah, I've got frustrations with that as well. I mean, we are a very adaptable species, and throughout our evolutionary past, sure, there were times where we would feast, there were times where we would fast, but trying to go about it in that way is just likely not optimal. There is definitely a benefit to periods of intermittent fasting, periods of extended fasting, but fasting is quite a stressor on the body. I never recommend extended fasting in the context of also being in a caloric deficit overall because it's just too many unnecessary stressors on the body. A lot of the benefits you get from, a cell apoptosis, autophagy standpoint, all these buzzwords that you hear about fasting are also true in the context of being in a caloric deficit. So there's no need to do both. Someone that is trying to lose weight, I would never really encourage them have like, 2 days of feasting and then like 3 days of fasting or whatever it is that protocol is that is recommended right now.
One of our questionnaires, we ask, who have you worked with in the space? And we get a handful from that practice, or I don't know if I don't think it's a practice actually. I think it's a group, but just older women wanting to feel better. And so they try it out and then their hormones tank or they end up gaining a lot of weight. So we see a lot of the aftermath, and I'm sure there's success stories. We just, that they're not in our practice because obviously they're coming to fix things. So
And think about it like this, like again, I'm going to sound biased because I'm a bodybuilder and I would encourage people to weight train, but like anybody, whether they compete or not, is going to benefit from resistance training. Like that's just that can't really be argued. And if you're trying to optimize your ability to train, having periods of time consistently where you're not eating for 3 days is the last thing you want to do to improve recovery and performance in a resistance trained setting. So that would not be optimal in any form or fashion there.
I interviewed with Dr. Lehman a few times, and he talks about how our body will absorb all the protein we consume, but we efficiently more so absorb or utilize maybe 40 grams, and then the rest, your body, the rest of the places absorb it other than muscle tissue. So if one, do you agree with that? And have you seen it, even if that is a true statement, have you seen it really imbalance people that are maybe in the bodybuilding space? And then if you believe or not in that, or have seen its efficacy, do you then purposely eat more meals so that you can then absorb more protein?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is talked about a lot right now. So muscle protein synthesis has been shown to be activated with, 30, 40 grams of protein, ample leucine. And for that reason, there's been a lot of recommendations for having multiple feeding frequencies with that 30 or 40 gram protein threshold so that you're getting ample leucine. And yes, that makes sense. I think the main determining factor is making sure you're consuming ample protein throughout the course of a 24-hour period. So for me, as long as I'm doing that, I would say pretty much all my boxes are checked because there's more than one way to activate muscle protein synthesis, weight training being one. So for me, I'll typically, in a building phase, have a weight training session. I'll have 2 meals a day. So 3 spiked periods of increased muscle protein synthesis. That checks all those boxes quite efficiently. When I'm in a fat loss phase, I'll sometimes transition to an OMAD approach. So I'm only consuming 1 meal a day, but still weight training. So that's still 2 activations of muscle protein synthesis. And that I think is totally adequate because for me, it's easier to sustain that lower calorie intake, that deficit, if I'm having one larger meal as opposed to multiple smaller meals that always leave me wanting more. So in that context, I benefit from a sustainability standpoint by having that OMAD approach. And what little I may be sacrificing by not having more feeding frequencies, I think is outweighed by the benefit of that increased sustainability component.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of how my approach is.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I think depending on what your goal is. Yeah, because sometimes, as much as I know that, I mean, there are some days it's rare where I'll have a very large meal and then one small snack, but I can't, it's hard. But on generally, I have 2 meals a day. But technically, just from that, like having 60 to 80 grams of protein for me would still be on the shorter end of the protein that I should probably be eating in a day. But so therefore, I eat more in those sittings than the 40 or 80 grams in total. And so, yeah, I think you have to also look into what works. And I will also lift. I don't definitely don't lift anywhere near you, but I'll still have my little weights So that's where maybe I'm getting some level of mental muscle synthesis. But go ahead, go ahead.
No, I totally agree. I think that's, I mean, sustainability is so much so the paramount thing. Like, what is going to be best for you? Like, I used to eat 6, 7 meals a day, and that is just not ideal. That's not really optimal from a lifestyle standpoint. I didn't like carrying Tupperware everywhere I went. So yeah, if it doesn't fit well with your life, you're gonna be less likely to adhere to it, and you got to figure out what you can willingly and enjoyably adhere to for the long haul.
Well, so when you were eating the 6 to 7 meals versus how you do 2 meals or OMAD, did you see a difference in like muscle gain or muscle loss?
None whatsoever.
Okay. So well, there's your answer. That's amazing. Okay. And then if we were to pull levers, obviously lifting weights will help you to build more mass, but eating sufficient protein is another dial. If in a day we had to pick one, and not saying that that's ideal either, but if we were to go to extremes, is it more critical that we eat sufficient protein every day or that we try to, build muscle mass every day?
If the So what is the overall goal? To build more lean tissue?
I know if it's to build, it's probably that we lift, but maybe just for longevity, maybe just for overall health and wellness.
I think using the muscles is probably the lowest hanging fruit for
Okay.
sure. So I feel like anybody would benefit from. I mean, when you look at, I'm going to, after this podcast, I'm going to go spend time with my mother and grandmother, and it's amazing to see the rate of decline in overall mobility and functionality of my grandmother, who does not lift at all, versus that of my mother, who stayed active throughout her entire life, even though she's not a bodybuilder by any means, but like just simply using that tissue. So the lowest hanging fruit, I would argue, is to simply use the muscle, because there's people that, have terrible diets, but they still work out and they've still got some degree of, health and well-being and longevity still working for them. Like their connective tissue is still in demand. Their cartilage is still functioning well. Obviously, getting ample nutrition and quality nutrition is of paramount importance as well. So like I don't want to ever suggest that one's more important than the other, but it is quintessential. If you don't use it, you lose it. That's very much so true with regards to lean tissue.
Yeah, Dr. Lehman mentioned, and just for the people that are listening and watching, he's just an expert in protein synthesis or amino acid usage. But he says himself too that as long as you're eating that bare minimum amount of protein, the exercise part is so much more critical. So just FYI too. Let's talk a little bit about Savage System. So I had the luxury of going in and just poking around. Your book, first of all, the ketogenic bodybuilding, is so tactical. I love it. You break down certain chapters of let's talk about this. Let's talk about supplements or how to refeed or how to cut bulking phases, and how to even pose, right? Like I always wondered how people pose. And now I have a book that shows or shares, and I could always do it in the mirror and never share it publicly. So you make it super tactical. And that's what I love. It's very, very approachable, very user friendly. And I feel like you use that and then expanded upon it into a group model educational system and even group support where people are able to connect, but the messaging and of each in each section. So you'll have like a cutting section where you'll talk about how to cut in all the nuances and maybe frequently asked questions, and you'll make them into these short clips. And again, it's really, really clean. And so bravo to you for all of that. But you make it super usable and tactical, which I love. Why did you decide to do this program and build this?
So I wrote the book. I think the book published in 2022, January 2022, if I remember correctly. And that's basically all that I've learned in kind of blending the worlds of bodybuilding and the ketogenic lifestyle all into one approach. And then I've been coaching now since 2016, I guess. The course is basically all that I've learned since then, and, in tandem, buttoned up into one resource that people can hopefully leverage, and I'll continue to add to going forward. And I feel like there's a need for this because there's just so much misinformation in the bodybuilding space. Like I love bodybuilding, I love the community, I love the competitors that I'm up on stage with, and I compete in all natural bodybuilding federations. So, there's the people that are competing in natural federations, they have a desire to be healthy. Like that's there. Otherwise they would, take in a bunch of steroids and go that route. Not to take anything away from the people that do that, but the people that compete in natural federations, they are placing an emphasis on being healthy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be natural. But
Okay.
there's so much misinformation around how to do the sport from like a nutritional standpoint, because oftentimes caution is thrown to the wind with regards to where they're sourcing their food, the amounts of food they're consuming. I was at a podcast yesterday with an incredibly impressive bodybuilder, but he was talking about consuming 900 grams of carbohydrates a day. It's like that's not abnormal in that space. Like people are doing that. So a lot of them are, pre-diabetic, diabetic, even though they look like, sculptures, Greek gods, that they're not healthy. So I wanted to take all that I had learned from, the ketogenic space, the carnivore space about nutritional quality, nutritional density, and bring that to that demographic. But then on the same side of the spectrum, all that I've learned in the bodybuilding space is so incredibly beneficial to those that are in the keto carnivore community that don't know anything about
Right.
weight training, modulating their caloric intake, having periods of defined building phases, defined cutting phases. So basically bridging the gap and bringing these two
Mhm.
worlds together in a resource that people of either demographic would benefit from was the whole overarching goal there. And I've worked with 600 people now one-on-one at this point, and it's great. I love doing it, but I can't really scale my
Right.
one-on-one coaching. Whereas with this course, it's pretty much everything I know in a course format that can be self-led, self-guided, so people can just take it and run with it at their own speed. So I can scale it and help more people.
The individual videos of the specific topic is only a few minutes, so you don't get overwhelmed with it. It gets very tactical. And then a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, honestly, I knew was in your videos, but it's these questions of, well, do we cut first? What about my diet? How much protein? I mean, all of these things are answered in the Savage system. And then it's also just even where you should begin, even your mental, because I saw some of the areas is talking about you need to be in the right mindset. And I think a lot of the questions we asked today, which it's not from bodybuilders that we're getting these types of questions. So the benefit of your system or your program would be beneficial for anyone that wants to refine. Like once you're past chronic illness and you're just trying to improve, like maybe you want to lose a little weight, maybe you just want to be at a better, like maybe I would love to build a little bit more muscle mass too. And so that's where your whole program could benefit me as well. And so I think I've seen many groups and programs, and I'll say that your program is very clean. Just looking at it, it's very easy to follow and it's easy to follow. It's not super overwhelming. And then there's just a lot of tactical pieces and elements that will help you to, refine. If you're stuck eating 1200 and anything above that is making you gain weight, but you know that you need to eat more, but you don't really want to gain a ton of weight long term, these phases that you're talking about, Robert, are so helpful for those types of people. And there's a lot.
I appreciate that. And that's definitely the goal. Like I feel like a lot of people want to get to a certain, way to composition and just hang tight there. But maintenance is a myth. I've never been a fan of the concept of maintenance. Like we're all getting older, so we're all declining unless we're improving. And having a defined building phase, in which case building more muscle is the key and the goal, and then having a defined fat loss phase and kind of modulating between those two, oscillating between those two in a healthy, sustainable manner is that's truly the fountain of youth. Like that is what the fountain of youth is. And if you can do that correctly via a ketogenic or carnivore approach to your nutrition, like that's just going to ensure that you get better and better as time goes on. And I've seen this play out time and time again with people, so I know it works. And so yeah, I think just giving people the roadmap to how to implement it is my whole goal with it.
Yeah, and you also have like weekly or monthly live calls as and Q&As, as well as a group forum where people that are of the like-minded set are able to chat.
Yeah, so with like if the Savage system, that includes the private community. Like you can get the community as a standalone thing, but if you get the system, you get that. We do weekly live calls. There's challenges in there. I've got like my own Keto Savage AI that I had some team build out, which is pretty cool because it like pulls from all the information of my book, every podcast I've done, the YouTube video. So it's like pulling all of my qualified information as opposed to just random chat GPT on the internet. So I feel like you're getting more qualified responses there as well.
There are a lot of people that suffer from eating disorders or disordered eating and they're not fully acknowledging it. Maybe going this route scares them a little bit of, okay, so I have to let go of the specific amount I eat or the specific amount I walk or I work out because I know somehow I'm managing my calories that way and my metabolic health. But in order to pivot from there, because I know I'm not at health, it might trigger some of the disordered eating stuff to continue. But we both talked about how we cannot just say that it's not our fault that we can't say no to addictive foods. But I like that we say, even if all of that is true, we still want there to be ownership on our end, because if you don't own what the good and bad in your life, you'll never improve. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but you and I were both on that food addiction panel, and you and I both resonate with each other in the type of messaging we wanted to get across. And while it may very well be true that we have the odds against us as far as, big pharma, big food, the advertising, the marketing that we've been, subjected to since birth, we at the end of the day control the foods that we put in our mouth. We control what we purchase at the grocery store. We control what we feed our kids. And I feel like empowering people is key, and having this mentality of extreme ownership is very empowering. And while it may not be easy, it can be much more simple, and it's certainly much more gratifying when you take ownership and you allow yourself to become, the dictator of what outcomes you see. And for me, when it comes to disordered eating, yeah, there may be things that are not handed to me. There may be things that are inconvenient, but knowing how to manipulate things, knowing what variables to manipulate, what levers to pull is incredibly beneficial. And if you have a structured approach to, okay, I am in a building phase, which means I am going to embrace putting on some body fat. I'm going to embrace eating at a caloric surplus, but I can couple that with the fact that, hey, look, I'm seeing my performance markers improve, my strength is improving, I'm getting better recovery, then it makes that, much more manageable, much more easy to tolerate. And same is true in reverse when with a strategic fat loss phase. Like you can know what levers to pull, what macros to manipulate to get the elicited response you're looking for. A lot of people are just spinning their wheels because they don't know where to turn, they don't know how to manipulate these things, and they just want to point the finger at some external circumstance. But like if you just take that extreme ownership and know what tools you have at your disposal to reach the desired outcome, like while there may be a lot more work involved in getting there, you know how to get there. And then you can be much more proud of the outcome once you do reach it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always think of it as there's always hard stories and stories of just, winning the wrong lottery ticket, being born, or having a food addiction, or having XYZ things happen in your life. But if there's even one person that has done better, even in your circumstance or even a harder circumstance, and that means that you can do it too. No
Yeah.
one is a special snowflake that is able to do things. And I know that there are some people that we know or we hear about that, do all hard things. But if there is someone that can do it, then that means you can too. And so I always think of it as whatever excuse you say or reason, and even if it's truth, so what? Then what are you going to do? And that's how I always think of it. And when we say it's not our fault, the food industry is so good, they've done so much research, the addiction model is real, they purposely do. So what? So then we have to take back control, because if we don't, we will live the life we live now, and we're clearly not happy with it. Otherwise, why are we seeking even to listen to this content? And if you want things to change, you cannot repeat past behaviors. And that might even just be what you're exposed to. So, for example, we won't have junk food in our house because I don't want that to be a lot of the part of my children's lives. And they still get exposed to it at school, but it's always it is up to you to make that decision. And I know it's hard for some people, but to say it is not your fault, the big higher ups, the big pharmas, big food, it's they're purposely puppeteering you, but that does not give you ownership, and it totally makes you stay where you are, and that is status quo, and I do not like or accept that. So
Yeah, and I feel like you and I mean, we're both entrepreneurs too, and there's a lot of overlap with what we've learned in being in business. But like for me, like there's all kinds of things with business. Like we have the Keto Brick. So like, there might be instances where we get a delay on a pallet of ingredients, or the film manufacturer for our packaging gets something wrong and it messes up. Like there's a million things that I can point my finger at and say, look, it's not my fault this happened. But at the end of the day, my name is what's on that package. My
right,
name is what I'm putting on the table there. And for that reason, it's always my fault.
right.
If my employee shows up late, it's my fault. It's always my fault. And having that extreme ownership mentality makes it so much more actionable, so much more empowering, and it makes me so much more proud of any outcome that I have. And I feel like when you adopt that with everything in your life, whether it's your parenting, your business, your health, your nutrition, your career, like you're going to be way better off for it. Even if it's not true, if you believe it to be true, then you're going to have so much more empowerment in your corner and so much more capacity at what you can do.
I love it. And we'll talk more about this topic, specifically about business entrepreneurship, because I love it, on your channel one day. So where can people learn and sign up for the Savage system and even your groups, maybe the coaching and Keto Brick, if you want to just share? And then where are you on social media?
Yeah, so ketobodybuilding.com for the Savage System, for the course, for the coaching, for the live call, like all that lives under ketobodybuilding.com, ketobrick.com for the bricks, and then I am Keto Savage on social and ketosavage.com for like my podcast and the content side of things.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me again today. It's always a pleasure and it's always so much fun talking to you. And you bring so much sanity and logic in what you share. And I just think the fact that it's so logical and tactical and how we can improve, I think it's such a it's a breath of fresh air. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you are at a place in your weight where, let's say, you've done a lot of healing and you're still not at a body composition that you like, there are things you can do. This is not, I guess I'm just in a body type that wants to be at this weight, or I guess I'm